Okay, great. Well, committee deadline. Glad to be here finally. I did note that Senate Democrats had 33 bills advanced out of committee this session. Lots of them were things we're really proud of moving forward around issues of great education for kids, access to health, of course things about transparency and accountability, and then good paying jobs. Of course we'll probably be grieving some of the bills that didn't make it through, and we'll be talking about that more soon. But really pleased with some of those great bills that passed. This week, Nikki Nice had a bill specifically about tax credits related to stillbirth. Senator Dossett is doing a study with an actuarial assessment for a paid leave program. I think those are really exciting opportunities for families. Those are the things I wanted to mention, so open to questions.
I wanted to ask, you and I talked a couple times about the cut score change. Superintendent Walters put out a news release this morning, months and months after the fact, now saying that the whole process of changing the cut scores was undermined and that they came out prematurely. CEQA and the governor were politically influencing the whole process. I guess, what is your reaction to that?
Wow.
You wrap your mind around that.
So,
he's been reticent about this for so long, and then now to hear that that somebody else is at fault for this, but that there was something wrong going on.
Yeah, so this is about the cut scores for standardized testing. I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that there was political influence, because clearly the numbers shifting that much, people knew that something squirrely was going on. I really feel like our superintendent needs to take responsibility for the data and for the processes in his agency that he's in charge of. So I'll have to read that carefully because I haven't yet, but I mean, it just makes me more mad.
Well, speaking of him, yesterday in the Appropriations Committee, the budget and recommendations from the State Department of Education were recommended by Senator Pugh, and you asked him, was there any consideration for the Bible initiative, and why was that left off? And he said there was no consideration for it. Today, now, the superintendent says that there's a website up that people can buy a Bible on it, and it'll go to Oklahoma classrooms. So I wanted to...
The Lee Greenwood Bible.
Yeah, the Lee Greenwood Bible.
Excellent.
God Bless the USA Bible.
Okay.
So just curious your thoughts on all this developments and everything.
Well, clearly he wants to keep this conversation in the media, and so he's going to keep pushing it forward. I thought, the Senate deciding not to recommend that funding makes sense. It's not the key focus for students. We knew it was a distraction from the beginning, but he's trying to keep it going. So I'm disappointed that we're, again, just not focusing on kids. We heard from people across the state who were upset about the purchasing Bibles for schools, felt like it was out of line, not a good separation of church and state. Many people who are worried about educators teaching from Bibles and not knowing how to teach from Bibles, everything from that to, of course, people feeling like it shouldn't be in schools at all. I think, maybe we can put this to bed at some point and move on to, the issues we really need to focus on, like textbooks and technology for our kids.
The state superintendent, echoing the president, has been all about closing the U.S. Department of Education and taking grants and things like that. But I want to get your reaction to that, and how do you think, if that actually happened, what would happen in Oklahoma? Because it doesn't just affect Common Ed, it affects career tech and higher ed.
Yeah, so about United States Department of Education, I'm very concerned. We have relied heavily on those federal guidelines in order to keep us accessible, serving kids with disabilities well, making sure we're being fair in higher ed. And so I think we've relied on those federal mandates to force us to do the right thing. If that gets pushed back to the states, I think we're going to have to revisit every part of how we make sure kids get a fair and complete education throughout. I think that's my biggest worry. And I'm very worried about special education. There's a real lack of understanding about what we've learned about learning disabilities and disabilities in general in our classrooms, and how kids need to be served for accommodations. And we saw that with the Lindsay Nicole Henry expansion bill that went through appropriations this week, which is kind of removing disability and adding special needs throughout that statute, which concerns me that they're trying to avoid Americans with Disabilities Act around accessible accommodations. And we can't act like special needs is not connected to disability. I'm worried that it's going to become more about just like what people want instead of about what children really need in order to learn. And so I feel like these things are intertwined,
There are two resolutions to reform the JNC. One does away with it, replaces it with a kind of more federal style version. One of them, makes the number of years that commissioners serve longer, and also removes the partisanship restrictions. Just your thoughts on the need for change in that commission or in that process, in the judicial selection process, and the two different proposals at hand, one in the House and one in the Senate.
Yeah, so I haven't read the House proposal yet, but I mean, the most important thing is an independent judiciary. It has to be a check on the legislature. And so anyone who thinks the federal process is working hasn't seen the wasted time and the empty seats. I mean, we have seen that in our state when we need more federal court activity, especially after McGirt, and we don't have enough. So my big worry is that you turn it into a circus, a political circus, instead of focusing on qualification and preparation. And I feel like we've come out with fairly fair justices recently. It's not like, I'm sure it's not the perfect process, but putting it into the public sphere is not ideal.
Have you had the chance to review the audit results, focusing on OSU, and some concerns with misappropriations there?
Just the very beginning of it. I read basically the beginning reports from non-doc, and I've always been concerned about the way we fund pass-through through the UHAT, the University Hospitals Trust, and through OSU's hospitals. Of course, it makes sense when it's specific to that hospital or med center, but it worries me when we start adding other projects. And the point is to go around the regions, because my colleagues don't like that the regions have independent power to make decisions about universities. I am grateful that we have regions to make sure that every political whim doesn't mean that universities are having to change their policies. So to me, it goes hand in hand with those pass-through funds that we keep putting out there.
Yeah, I was curious if you had concerns moving forward about funding for the university, but also for the OSU Medical Authority. Is that what?
I mean, I think they're doing great projects, and we're seeing great progress with the facility being built in Tulsa. But I think we just have to be aware of the mission of those entities and keep our appropriations to them focused on those missions. Otherwise, it should go through regions. It should. I think one of the reasons we like to fund that way is control, and then the other is so they can move quickly. And in this case, it looks like moving quickly wasn't the best strategy. Yeah.
Are you surprised at the scale or the problems with mental health departments, with the lack of funding, and they're possibly needing a $60 million supplemental out of FY25? I mean, that seemed to come up in the last few weeks based on their new CFO over there.
Yeah, I'm very concerned for the mental health department. I think they've been dealing with a lot of challenges simultaneously, everything from, of course, the consent decree, which I'm really pleased we passed this week, and the potential challenges of that. Also, the move of Griffin, and that's been a real challenge. So I think Commissioner Friesen has had a lot of things on her hands. I mean, I worry, is it like the State Department of Health, where maybe that's not missing that much money and it's just about the way that it operates? But I want to know. I think this is an issue when we drive away expertise from state government. Do we have experienced CFOs who know how these things operate and have the ability to look at the long term and really hold that transparent and the oversight to be strong? We got rid of their board. Let's remember that just a couple years ago, we got rid of that external board. So there's no requirement for a board to review those finances. So guess who said that he was in charge? It's the governor said he's in charge if we have no board, right? So who's watching those finances and catching those things? I think that's one of the reasons we have transparency around public money and public decisions, is to catch those things as they go. So I'm real worried about it. I hear a commitment from my colleagues to make them whole, because we certainly know that any reduction in their budget is going to impact our inpatient hospitalizations and our incarceration rate if we're not spending that money on preventative health.
Well, what about going forward through the budget process through the rest of the year? Are all the unanswered questions going to delay coming up with a state budget for other agencies?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are sitting on a lot of cash from past years that we haven't spent. So if it's one-time money, I don't see that it's going to be a big problem there. If they think it's recurring money that we need to invest, then I think it will be a bigger conversation. And in fact, the resolutions we passed this, or I guess they were recommendations made this week in our budget process, will probably have to be revisited if that's true. Yeah. What else, y'all?
Anybody have any other questions?
Already asked her.
You asked Senator Paxton.
No, I asked her too. Didn't I ask you about initiative petitions?
No. Do you want to talk about initiative petitions?
You're right.
I think you already predicted what I was going to say, didn't
Well, I
you?
may have. There's a bill, Senator Paxton and Senator Boyd's bill on initiative petitions that tend to clamp down a whole lot on what it takes to get initiative petition through.
Yeah, I mean, this is undermining the petition process is undermining citizens' ability to participate in government. This is a very important part of our Constitution, and all these changes that have happened on the statutory side are undermining citizens getting to participate. We started with the technology change for gathering signatures that left us an unknown timeline. We added the beginning and end where you could appeal. Now all these additional steps are going to make it almost impossible to do. I think we should trust the people. So if they choose to put it on the ballot, they should get to put it on the ballot. And there's a lot of concerns around money in those initiative petitions. There's money around every bit of legislation up here. There are people lobbying every single bill we have. So to say that the people don't have a right to raise money to fund something they think is important in government, to me, that's a distraction, By the way, I want to mention that Senator Goodwin's bill failed, which would have required a deadline for the governor to put it on the ballot. So Senator Goodwin was disappointed that if the people bring together enough signatures to put a state question, that the governor should put it on the ballot quickly. And I think it was a 6-month timeline. It went down hard. And I think it went down on party lines.
Any other questions?
It was in judiciary. And I think it was, to me, it's like, do you want to make this clear? Do you want to promise that this process is going to be clear? And there were a lot of logistical questions, but I think fundamentally not wanting to make that clear for the public and for citizens who might be running that process is a concern. Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Senator.